Welcome to today's Lunch and Learn series. This is the first in our series about how to get your business organized for the new year. I'm Kathleen Thompson, and I'm here with Steve Mahoney, and we're both SCORE mentors, and we're here to work with you on this topic. So before we dig into today's topic, I am going to remind everyone who was there and inform everyone who wasn't at the first workshop what we covered the last time, which was the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats analysis. This, you can see on the screen what this is for, and we're not going to go into lots of details, but this is a great tool to assess the state of your business, even if you're only getting started on your business. Even if you haven't actually started it yet, it's a good idea to do this analysis. So if you want to learn more about this, you can watch the previous workshop, or you can go to the link that we will send you after the workshop ends. Because today's focus is on two things: how to get from this SWOT analysis to actually work on stuff that's going to make goals happen, and how to make sure that the important ones get done. So this is the secret, and I want you to memorize the phrase that's going to show up on the screen. The key is in the SSC. Now, what's the SSC, you ask? It is not super secret code. It actually stands for start, stop, and continue. Now, what this is another analysis that you say, based on my SWOT, which is strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, what do I want to start doing? What do I want to stop doing? And what do I want to continue doing? Now, the things that you might start, stop, or continue could be a product or service, a piece of your business, could be actions that you take, it could be suppliers, or they could be customers. So they're not always things I'm going to do per se about myself, but they could be any of those options. So for example, what are you doing that's working so well that you want to keep it up? Or that you feel compelled to continue because it's such a powerful motivator or mission? Secondly, what should you stop? What's not working, or it looks like it won't work in the future? What's holding you? What are you doing that's holding you back from something else? And then thirdly, what should you start? It could be an opportunity for growth. It could be training that you need for a skill to develop. It could be hire or outsource some work. It could be some kind of marketing campaign. What should be new? And again, it could be a product or service, actions, a supplier, or a customer. So the key is in the SSC, and we made it rhyme so it'd be easier to remember. So some examples of how to do this. The last workshop's SWOT was a financial planning consulting company, and I'm going to call it WealthWise Solutions. So one of the key strengths for this company, they said, was proprietary consulting tools. One of the weaknesses was they have a low profit margin and they're losing clients following price negotiations. One of the opportunities was that there's a high demand for financial consulting services in general, and there's the possibility for additional services from new IRA tax laws. The threat, one of the key threats, was that a new competitor just opened their doors and they're offering lower prices and higher salaries. So I chose those because there was a trend. There was a trend with all those things that's related. So it's what, if you think about that and you put your business coach hat on, what is the crux of the problem? And oh, by the way, how valuable are those proprietary consulting tools right about now? And what might this person in this business start or stop or continue doing? So one example of how you could fill this out for those topics is, and I'm going to start on the right-hand side and move to the left. is you could continue focusing on great customer service because your customer service is awesome. And what might happen if you do that is that some of your customers might come back. The ones that left for price might come back because they realize the service isn't so great with the other one because they're so busy sucking customers in at a low price that they have no capacity to deliver. And in fact, you might even enhance your marketing campaign by doubling down on your customer service and show how that helps your clients. And so it might actually gain you new clients. So that's a continue or a possible continue. Now, what you say you want to stop is I want to stop cutting price in a race to the bottom. And you know that that's necessary in order to stop the bleeding that's happening in your business right now. But the question is, can you just do that? And we'll see how to handle that in a minute. And what you want to start is you want to niche down to be in a category of one. You do not want to compete with every Tom, Dick, and Harry that does financial consulting. So when you think about how to do that, you ask yourself, where's there a hole in this industry that I can fill? It might be in the client profile, for example. I might decide that I want to focus on female mid-career executives because I know that they often have holes in their career, that they take time off for child raising. And so they don't have as much, they don't rise in the organization as quickly. They often don't make as much money as men. And so they enter retirement with less money. And so I want to focus on them. Or I might focus on people who are getting ready to retire because they're getting nervous about that. And now they're suddenly looking for help. Or I might focus on 20-somethings who work for a startup because I know if that startup does well, they're going to get a lot of equity in the company and they might suddenly be wealthy. Alternatively, I could focus on something about the product, like we only deal with climate conscious investments, or we focus on balancing your needs between high returns, low risk, and your tax implications of all of the above. I also could consider raising my prices to be in a different niche, to work with wealthier people, because when the race is to the bottom, I could just choose not to play in that sandbox. And in that case, I would find another way to differentiate myself. So you can see that niching down to be in a category of one could have multiple approaches to it to accomplish the same thing. So now that we know what our SSC are, start, stop, continue, now we're going to get into practical actions. What can we actually do? And can we simply stop the things on our stop list? Well, the answer is maybe, maybe not. We can't necessarily simply stop the stops because it depends on what it is. Let's say, for example, I want to stop working with a particular customer because they're very time consuming and they're constantly trying to negotiate their price down. Well, maybe I can't afford to lose that customer right away, or I don't want to annoy them unnecessarily because they might give me a reference. So I might need to unwind this customer relationship over time. I also might be contractually obligated. So it might be that I have to wait until the contract expires. Or I might need to replace this customer with a new one before I can get rid of the old one, depending on what the scenario is. Or I might need to change my marketing strategy to attract different customers. Let's say I want to stop this product. Well, if it's not the business I just described and it's something else, like I'm actually selling a product of some kind, I might need to liquidate that product over time. And the question is, am I going to sell this product off at full price and just not buy any new ones? Or am I going to sell it at a discount to get rid of it? Or let's say I want to stop a particular behavior or tactic. Now, this behavior or tactic might be something that's a standard practice. It might be an ingrained habit, or it might be a strong belief that I have to change. And we'll get more into those later. So the key is that What you want to stop isn't actually an action. It's the absence of an action. And most of the time, you can't just stop the action or stop whatever, or stop the thing, whatever the thing is. You have to actually take an action to do something else instead. And so even the stop turns into an action to do rather than simply stopping. So with that having been said, now we're going to turn toward goals, because after the SSC comes goals and then projects and then our tasks and actions. So goals. You may have heard in the past about SMART goals. SMART goals, you can see on the screen what that stands for. The more specific and measurable and attainable and relevant and time-bound you make your goals, the more applicable they are to you and the more likely it is that you'll actually do them because you know what it is you're doing. Goals need to be a little more dialed in order for you to actually accomplish them. If I just say, I want to increase sales, what do I mean by that? Do I want to increase sales by $1? Then I did it. I can say, ooh, I did it. Or do I want to increase sales by 100%? That might not be attainable. So you can see that SMART makes a lot of sense. But what I've found is that it's not enough, that I call them SMART C goals. And there are 2 C's associated with these goals. The first is compelling. Oftentimes, if a goal is not being accomplished, it's because we hit a spot where it got difficult. We hit a roadblock, it's taking longer than we thought, it's not having the results we expected, whatever. And at that point, if the goal isn't not only relevant, but isn't compelling, the likelihood is we won't push through. So the more compelling you can make the goal, the better. Oftentimes what this means is finding a vision for your business that's deeper and stronger than simply relevant. Why is this so important to you? Why is even having this business so important to you? Something that is what you could call a worthy cause, something that is so far beyond you that the likelihood is it will never be accomplished in your lifetime, and you're not the only one trying to make it happen. For example, if you are trying to serve homeless people and help them find housing, the likelihood is there will be homelessness in our lifetime and probably in the lifetimes to come. But it doesn't have to be as much homelessness. It could be significantly less. And there could be other ways in which people who are homeless could be helped. The same would be true if you're trying to empower women to do something, whether it be to have more financial independence or whatever it happens to be. Then you could say, I would love to see women be financially independent and be able to go into retirement with plenty of money. Now, you know that 100% of women, that's not going to be the case, but you can help to move the dial. And so that's what I mean by something compelling. Because the more compelling, the more likely it is that you're going to sacrifice to make it happen, and you're going to push through the hard times. The second one is control. It could be uber compelling, and you still may have zero control over the results. And so, for example, a sales goal, if you've already got a lot of experience selling and you've been in business for a while, and you know, if I do certain things with marketing, I know my sales are going to go up, then it is something you can control to a large degree. If you're new at it and you've got zero sales and you've got a goal for sales, you have a lot less control over the results. So if the goal you have established is a result goal, like I'm going to have X dollars in sales by the end of the year, or I'm going to increase sales by 20%, or whatever the goal happens to be, if it's an outcome-based goal and you find that you're just not even hitting it and you're working like crazy and beating your head against the wall, then perhaps this goal is not under your control. And so then what you want to do is change the goal and name the goal to be actions that you can take that you think might yield the results you're looking for. And then what you would do is evaluate those actions over time and say, are they getting me closer to the outcome I'm looking for, or are they not? And if not, I might want to change my approach. Here's an example of what I mean. I took a workshop called The Best Year Ever, which was at the beginning of the year. It was kind of like New Year's resolutions, only with a different title. And we were supposed to list out goals in every aspect of our life. And I chose one about sleep because I had insomnia. And so I said my goal was to sleep for 7 hours a night for 6 out of 7 nights a week. And what I found was that over time, it wasn't happening at all. And so I was like, fail, 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 fail. And then I started doing some research about sleep. And I found that you can't actually control the number of hours you sleep. You can control the number of hours you're in bed. And you can control factors that will contribute to your sleeping. I changed my goal to an action I could control, which was I'm going to go to bed before 11 o'clock at night, 6 out of 7 nights a week. And I'm going to end my screen time at 9 p.m. to reduce blue light and stimulation that might cause me to stay awake. Once I did that for long enough, I could see if it was making any impact on my actual sleep. And if it wasn't, I could try something else. So what's my goal for WealthWise solutions based on the SWOT and the SSC? The goal I came up with is I want to increase the average price for my services by 15% within 6 months so I can donate 5% of my time to those who can't afford my service. Now, is this goal compelling? Yes, because I gave a deeper reason, because I want to help everyone I possibly can, but I can't do that if I don't raise my prices. Because one, I might not be in business anymore, and two, it really matters to me that I can spend some of my time helping people who can't afford me. And so this raising my prices enables me to help more people than I could by simply serving those who can pay me. Now, is this goal within my control? I don't know yet. So it might be and it might not, and we'll find out over time. So after I have my goal, I now create a project or two. And I say, what am I going to do to make my goal happen? And so you can see my goal at the top of the screen that I want to increase the price of my services. And then I brainstorm some ideas of projects that I could do that might help to make that come true. And so I came up with 4 options. And then what I do is what I call an evaluation of each of those ideas to see which one might make the most sense, or ones. There might be more than one that I choose to work on. And so you can see that I have 4 columns: effort, impact, cost, and time, and I rate them on a scale from 1 to 5. The lowest score is better. So if I have more impact in my business, it gets a 1. If I have less cost, time, or effort, they get a 1. And so I evaluate each one of them from 1 to 5 and add up the columns, and I get a total on the right-hand side. And you can see that the 2 with the lowest scores are the ones at the bottom. Now, what I normally tell people is to look at the ones that have the best scores and evaluate them further using your own logic and your own intuition and a little more insight besides just a numeric score. So for example, the one on the bottom has the lowest score by far. And it's evaluate the impact to existing clients if I apply the increase to them. Okay, great. So what does that mean? Well, what I would do is say, let's say I raise my prices by 15% to all my clients. Who do I think might stop working with me if I do that? Because they can't afford it, they get ticked off, for whatever reason, I know what my relationship has been with them so far. I know the things they've said. It's a guess. I don't really know exactly, but I'm going to estimate what that might look like if I raise my prices by 15%. Now, what I could do is do kind of like a three-step analysis to that. And I could say, what if I did it incrementally? What if I did it 5% and then 5% and then 5% over time? Or what if I did it right away? Or what if I split it in half and did 7.5 and 7.5? You might not want to get that granular. It's up to you. And so I asked myself, how many clients would I lose if I raised my prices by 15% to existing clients versus how much more money do I make by raising my prices by 15%? So in other words, if I guessed that 10% of my customer base is going to be gone, does the 90% raising the price by 15% compensate for the loss, or does it not? And so depending on what my estimate is going to change the analysis. And so what I could do there is I could also do a worst case, best guess, and best case analysis and say, if I thought that 5% would drop off, or if I thought that 10% would drop off, or if I thought that 20% would drop off, what happens by raising the price? What's the difference between raising the price and losing the customers? Now, that effort doesn't take very long. As you can see, it doesn't cost anything much because it's just my time. It's not going to take me that long to do that analysis. But the thing is, I don't know the impact to my business yet. So I rated it a 3 because it's in the middle between 1 and 5. So what I want to do is look at the next one on the list and say, upgrade client profile and service offering, because that got an 11, which is definitely better than the 2 that have 15. And so in this case, I think the impact to my business could be huge. And I don't think it's going to cost me that much because it's my work. So I don't have a lot of outside expenses. It's not like I have to develop a new website or pay anybody to do a whole bunch of marketing stuff or whatever. But the effort to me is going to be long. So what I would probably choose to do in this case is both of these projects and make the one with the lowest score something I can knock off pretty quickly and get started on the second one and just know that I'm going to chip away at it over time so that I can get that one done eventually because it's going to have the biggest impact, but it's going to take the longest time. I wouldn't even bother with the other 2 for now because they all were high effort as well, and they have less impact. So there's no point. So hopefully that helps you understand how you can evaluate, once you know what your goals are, what you do next. Okay, so now that I have my projects, I chose the one that was the longer project to show what happens next because the other one has almost no tasks associated with it. So this is how we actually get the work done. Make a list of what we have to do to get that project done. And just to remind you, it's upgrade client profile and service offering. So here's what I think I need to do. And I just made a list of all of them. And once you have the list, then you assign them if you have a team, or if they're you know they're you, and then you schedule them. When am I going to get them done? And you can put them on your calendar. You can schedule them however you see fit. And then once they're scheduled, they magically get done, right? Well, not exactly, right? Not exactly. And why not? Well, 1, you might do all the work on that list and the results don't happen according to your plan. 2, you might do a bunch of work and it's not the work that will actually make a difference. 3, you get stuck starting or continuing or finishing the work. So if the problem is the first one, then that was what we talked about earlier, where maybe your goal is something you can't control. So in that case, what you'd want to do is focus on what you can control and which is actions that might lead to the outcome you're looking for. Evaluate the actions you're taking, see if it's leading you in the right direction, and then if not, change your actions. And know that it might simply be that you need more time, or it might be that you need to change your approach. Now, if the issue is the other two that I mentioned, you're doing some work, but it's not the work that actually makes a difference, or you're getting stuck somewhere in the process, then this next slide is for you. And this is the question that we asked on the poll: which describes you the best? And there are 7 choices, and you listed the one that you said sounded like you the most. And I believe the number 1 was procrastinator. Oh no, it was perfectionist was the number 1 choice. So what I want you to do is, if you weren't here when we did the poll, I want you to look at these and think which one describes you the best. And if you were here, I want you to look at this and say to yourself, is there a second one that also relates to me, that I think is my second choice? Because what we're going to do is work with these descriptions to explain and help you get things done that aren't getting done. So the first thing is, what happens if you're doing work, but it turns out not to be the work that actually moves the dial? There's 4 choices on here that fit that description. The first one is the organizationally challenged. The second is the overcommitter. The third is the achiever. And the fourth is the creator. And you'll see why in just a minute. If you're not getting things done, period, for whatever reason, you're not starting it, you're not continuing, or you're skipping stuff, or you're not finishing, then you could be the procrastinator, the perfectionist, or you could be self-sufficient. Now, every single one of these 7 is something that actually, no matter what it sounds like on the screen, can be a strength in the right context and to the right degree. And every single one of these is also potentially an inhibitor to accomplishing your goals. And you'll see what I mean now. Here are the 7 categories of characteristics. Oops. And you'll see that there is a green and a red box underneath each one of those. So what I want you to do is focus your eye on the one or ones that you chose for yourself while I'm talking. You can see that every one of the green boxes is something that's excellent and a good, positive characteristic to the trait that you have cited for yourself. And the red box is something that could be an inhibitor to getting things that you want to get accomplished done. So you can see that each one of these has a positive and a negative side. All right, so hopefully you have seen your own, and we will move on to the next screen. This is often why the characteristic or characteristics you chose for yourself become an inhibitor. And oftentimes it's fear. Fear is what's behind the negative side of these attributes. Not always, but a lot of the time. Now, fear is not bad. Fear is not a sign of weakness. Fear is what lets you know that you're on to something. Fear is actually good because it tells you that you're doing something that's so important that it matters to you and the stakes are high. If you didn't care, you wouldn't be afraid. It's only because you care so much. The other thing that's important to know is that fear is something you cannot get rid of. Every single person has it. The most successful people, the only difference between them and the rest of everyone else is that they figure out how to work with the fear. They don't figure out how to eliminate it. Elizabeth Gilbert, in her book called Big Magic, that was written about creativity, says this. She writes or talks to fear, and she says, "Dearest fear, creativity and I are about to go on a road trip together. I understand you'll be joining us because you always do. I acknowledge that you believe you have an important job to do in my life and that you take your job seriously. You're allowed to have a seat and you're allowed to have a voice, but you are not allowed to have a vote. And above all, my dear old familiar friend, you are absolutely forbidden to drive." Now, when you have this attitude that fear can come along for the ride, but they can't drive you, and once you say what the fear is out loud, like one of the things on this screen, it loses some of its power. It loses its bite. You can start to deal with it. So how can you deal with it? Well, there's a whole bunch of ways. The first one is you can reframe it. You can call it what it is, and you can also reframe what you're doing or reframe what the problem is into something that's positive. Remind yourself that saying I'm afraid of letting people down means I'm highly committed. And once you say you're highly committed, now you're going to be highly committed to getting it done. You can also practice doing the thing you fear. So if you're the perfectionist and you're afraid of failing, you can make yourself fail multiple times. You can say, I am going to do a thing that's going to make me fail on purpose until I don't fail anymore. I'm going to paint, or I'm going to do something that I've always been terrible at, and I'm going to be awful, 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 awful until I'm not so awful. Because once you realize that failure isn't really bad, failure is just data that lets you know either I need to learn more, I need to outsource more, or I need to take a different approach, it's all good. You can also let your strengths help to offset your weaknesses. Doesn't always work, but sometimes you can. And the fourth thing you can do is you can turn work into play. Find creative ways to make work, especially work you don't want to do, feel like play. You can turn something into a game. Let's see how many times I can do this before I faint. No, that's not good. Let's see how many times I can do this in an hour. Let's see if I can try improv and see what would I do if I were somebody else, like if I were a character that I find hilarious. What would I do if I were someone I definitely want to emulate, like a famous person in my niche? What would I do if I were them? How would I behave? And let's try to act like them. There's all kinds of ways you can turn things into a game. Now, what else can you do? You can use the power of habits. And habits was in the title of this workshop. And why are we talking about habits? Because every time you do something and have to decide to do something that's hard, you have to make a decision, and you have to use your willpower, and decision and willpower fatigue are actual things. Charles Duhigg, in his book called The Power of Habit, says this: willpower isn't just a skill, it's a muscle. Like the muscles in your arms or legs, and it gets tired as it works harder. So there's less power left over for other things. Because this is what happens. Your brain tries to conserve energy for when it really needs it. And that's where the habits come in, because habits are shortcuts to decisions and willpower. And so your brain can save its energy for the most important stuff. So in a nutshell, what are habits? Habits are actions that you can control, that you repeat again and again and again so that they become automatic. So now that we know what habits are, how can we use them to our best advantage? And this habit loop is something that Charles Duhigg outlines in his book. There are three components: the cue, the routine, and the reward. The cue is what tells your brain to go into automatic mode and which habit to use. Like put your exercise shoes by the bed so you have to trip over them and so that you actually go for a walk. The routine is anything that's either physical or mental or emotional, anything that you keep doing and the order in which you do it. The reward is what helps your brain figure out, is this loop something I want to remember for the future and turn into a habit or strengthen? And that reward needs to be worth it to you. It has to be important to you, not something you think you should feel like is a reward. So one of the things that Charles recommends is to optimize this habit loop, is to do this. If you already have a habit that you want to change to something else, then it's optimal to use the same cues you've used in the past and keep the same reward you've used in the past and only change one thing, the routine. So for example, let's say my habit is I keep my phone by my bed, and first thing in the morning when I wake up, I check social media to see how my posts have done. And I get a dopamine hit as I see the responses I got. So I want to keep the cue basically the same, keep the phone by my bed. But the difference is I want to change the routine. So now instead of opening it and checking it for my social media posts, I type up a saying that's going to become a picture that goes on that becomes the wallpaper on my phone, so I don't even need to unlock it. And it says, go for a walk first thing, you'll be glad you did. The reward is similar because once I take that walk, I get the endorphin hit from the exercise, which is similar to the dopamine hit I got by checking my social media posts. So I had a same cue, similar reward, and all I changed was my routine. The other thing is it's optimal if you can change the routine as little as possible and still make a big improvement. Now, you can't always do that, but sometimes you can. And this is what's wrong with New Year's resolutions, because as you look at this habit loop, you see, what's a New Year's resolution? I'm one way on December 31st, and I'm going to be a completely different way on January 1st. And so I've probably changed the cue. I've changed the routine massively because it's going to look nothing like it looked on December 31st. And who knows what the reward is? I don't even think about the reward. I just think about changing the routine. And so I've expected to change too much, too quickly, and I haven't really thought it through. It's too much for our system because remember, our brain likes to conserve energy and it will freak out and then you won't get it done. So the more you can minimize the disruption, change the routine as little as possible, keep the cues and the rewards the same, the better off you are. Because even though it feels like it's going to take longer to do smaller things, it actually is faster in the long run. So we're going to go back and take our WealthWise Solutions client into account, and we're going to go through the process in real life so that you can see how this actually works for your business. So I had my SSC problem, which was the competition with undercutting my margins. I decided on my start, stop, and continue actions. I created a project, which was upgrade my client profile and service offering. And I had a task list, which was a partial list on the screen. And that's the list you see here. Now you'll notice there's an extra column now off to the right, which says, are these tasks complete? And you'll notice that there are steps that are skipped. I did 1, 3, 4, then I skipped to 8 and 9. So somehow I missed 2, 5, 6, and 7. So why did that happen? Well, because we do what's comfortable first. It's natural, right? And it might be because it's comfortable because we have more skill at the things we did. It might be because it fits our personality better. And it might be because those are things we're not afraid to do. And the things we skipped are things we are afraid to do. Now, it's important to determine why we skipped stuff. And it's easy to pass it off as, oh, it's because I don't have skill. But really, sometimes don't have skill is a smokescreen for actually I'm afraid and I have more skill than I think I do. So once I've determined really by doing some heart seeking, soul searching, once I've determined which ones are skill and which ones are fear, I can now address the situation. Now, sometimes I don't have a skill because of my personality. For example, let's say my personality in this situation is that I am highly extroverted and my best work is done when I'm conversing with other people. So you can see that the things that I did were things that relate to other people. But the market research, not so much, because I tell myself I'm not good at market research because it doesn't have me talking with other people. So what I could do is I could use my personality to help me do market research. I could find a person to connect with to help me do it together. I could do co-working, so we're sitting side by side. There's all kinds of ways I could address that. But that's important to know because it's going to help you develop the skill. Or if you have enough money, you could say, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to hire somebody to do it for me because I really, really, really don't want to do it. Now, if it turns out that what's causing the delay is the fear angle, now we can address it by using the techniques that I described earlier. And so, again, you can break down the market research task into even smaller tasks, ones that you know you can accomplish so that you can gain some momentum, so that you can feel like you accomplished something, and so it keeps you going. And then you want to revisit your purpose and your vision to say, I am going to push through this hard thing because it's really important, because I can't get a new marketing plan done until I do step 2. And so that's really important to me. So we said before, and I had you remember, the key is in the SSC. But better said now, SSC is the key and habits are the door. Habits are the door to a whole new level of success, because a great way to kick off the new year is to start to develop habits that are going to help you achieve your goals. Because you saw that even when you break down your tasks, your goals don't always happen. And that's because sometimes your habits are getting in the way. So SSC is the key and habits are the door. All right, now, after this workshop is over, we will send you an email with the replay of this workshop in case you want to watch it again and learn more. And in that email, you will get a list of helpful materials. Some are books, some are videos, or the SWOT analysis blog post that I referenced earlier in the workshop. We will send you this so you don't have to take a screenshot or anything like that. And you can go find these references if you want to use them for yourself. In the meantime, one of the things that I would suggest you do is practice. Hearing us talk is all great, but where you really learn is in the doing. So it would be helpful if you practice with the start, stop, continue, practice talking to fear, and practice creating a habit loop for yourself. And one option you have if you want to get more out of this workshop is to work with a SCORE mentor. If you already have one, great. Then what you might want to do is take some of the concepts from this workshop, start working with them, and then bring the in-process work to your mentor. If you don't have a mentor, we're going to give you the opportunity to ask for one today. And so we're going to launch a poll. Steve's going to launch the mentor poll and ask you if you're currently working with a mentor or not. And if you're not, if you would like to. If you answer the question yes, we'll send you one further email which tells you how you can get a mentor. If you answer the question no, we won't bother you again. You can go on your way, and you can always request one by going to the website at score.org. Now, we're going to also, while this poll is going on, we're going to start the Q&A. And so if you've already posted in the question and answer box at the bottom of the screen, then Steve will start going through those questions and see what you wanted to discuss. And if you haven't, feel free to post a question now. As a reminder, if it's something that's more confidential and you want to ask it after we turn off the recording, just say so, and we will hold it until later. All right, Steve.
All right, thanks, Kathleen. I see a bunch of people answering the poll, so thank you for doing that. We don't have any questions right now in the Q&A box, but if anybody has any, please feel free to type those in now, and we will get to them. Kathleen, I had a question, interested in your advice on this one. As you were going through kind of the task list, do you have advice for folks who feel like their task list is always changing, or how often they should update it or refresh it? What's your advice, or how do you handle that question?
I would say it somewhat depends on what the thing is. And let's say first you keep changing your task list. It could be that you're changing your task list because you missed steps and you realize, oh, I need to do something in order to actually accomplish my goal, and I didn't have it on the list. So that's one possibility. If you're changing your task list randomly in the middle, you have to ask yourself the question, why? Am I changing it because what I started to do isn't working? It's not accomplishing my goals? Because there's two things. The tasks are associated with a project, and the project either is or isn't complete. You don't know whether the project is going to actually accomplish the goal you want, but you at least want to say, I finished the project. So I would say the tasks, as long as they're associated with a project, you want to finish the tasks on the project. Because if you don't, and you never finish the project, you don't have any way of knowing whether they're going to have an impact on the goal or not. So don't just keep changing the task list, especially if the tasks are unassociated with the projects you wanted to work on. Now, that having been said, once you finish a project, if it doesn't make any difference to your goals, then you want to say, all right, that project was either useless or somewhat useless. I'm going to pick another project and see if it actually makes a difference for my business.
Right. So it's really about honing in on the goals, right? It's the kind of
Yes.
means to the end, and thinking about what your goals are and kind of backing up from there.
Yes. Because if you go
Right.
straight from goals to tasks, you might be missing something important in the process.
No, that's a good point. So we still have time for questions. If anybody has anything, feel free to put that in the Q&A box. We don't have any questions that have been submitted at this point. You know, one of the things I was thinking about when you were just answering that question around the task list is thinking about the time frame and the sequencing, right? And trying to set deadlines. I know sometimes I would get in the habit of saying, I've got all these things I'm going to do, and I'm going to do them all this week. And then realizing 2 days into the week that I'm hopelessly lost and I'm never going to get this. So any advice in helping people think through how to set a time parameter for getting your tasks done?
I would say, first of all, this is pretty universal. It almost always takes longer than we think it will. I did this as a profession for years, developed technology with a team of people. And no matter how much we estimated how long it was going to take, we were rarely correct. So we got better at it. The more you do it, the better you get at it, the better you get at estimating. But when you're inexperienced, it's harder to estimate. So pretty much you will underestimate how long it's going to take. So my advice is to really only schedule things for about 2 weeks and not bother anything past that point, because the likelihood is you will be incorrect, and then you have to keep moving everything, and that's annoying, especially if you use a written planner. It's easier if you do things electronically, but a lot of people like to write things, and if you write things and you're constantly having to cross them out or erase them, it gets really frustrating and it starts feeling like you're failing. So I think you're better off only detail scheduling out anything that you think you're going to get done in the next 2 weeks. And then when you get close to the end of those 2 weeks, you can see how you're tracking, and stuff that hasn't gotten done, you can automatically just push into the next 2 weeks. And that way you're better off, because no one should feel bad unless they're just not doing anything. No one should feel bad about things taking longer than they thought they would.
Right.
So it's really, really helpful to keep the momentum going.
Right. I mean, the other thing I've done in the past is we used to have this saying, right to left planning, where thinking about a deadline or an event in the future and saying, okay, I've got this delivery that I've got to, get done for my customer, and it's due in 6 weeks. I know that deadline is fast and firm. How do I back everything up that I need to get done and make sure I've got plenty of time and lay out the tasks in that task period? It's kind of like similar to how you and I plan these webinar series, but kind
Yes.
of doing that right to left planning aspect. That way you can have a sense of how things are going to emerge over the next, 6 to 8 weeks, and then how you can fill in other things you need to get done over that time period, in addition to that, achieving that one goal.
Yes, that's true. And I'm glad you brought that up, Steve, because when you look at any kind of a project, you have three parameters that you have control over, well, or that can change. One is the scope, two is the timeline, the deadline, and third is the cost or resources. So, for example, if the deadline is firm, then the only options you have are to modify the scope. If you're running into problems, the only options you have are to modify the scope or to modify the resources. So you could throw more people at it, throw more money at it, whatever. Or if you can agree that the scope has to come down. Now, if you're a solopreneur and you agreed to something with your client and you have no choice but to deliver it and deliver the scope you contractually agreed to, then what you're going to have to do is spend more time yourself burning the midnight oil to get it done if you're behind. That's the only choice you have. So when you think about those three aspects, now you can see that sometimes clients may have increased your scope in the meantime and not changed your timeline, in which case they have you have allowed them to put you in a bind. And so what I would do in that scenario is early on the negotiations, if the scope increases, I would also ask to increase the timeline. And if they don't agree to that, I'd increase the price so I could potentially outsource or at least get paid for my pain and suffering of having to work like crazy.
Yep. No, that's great advice. And it's funny, I was just thinking about, as you were talking about kind of laying out those tasks and going back to your comment about things always taking longer than you originally planned. One of the best pieces of advice I got early on in my career was leave time in your day for the crisis du jour, because
Mm-hmm.
inevitably something is going to come out of nowhere that you've got to drop everything that you plan to do and devote an hour or two to responding to something urgent, a customer call, a family emergency, whatever. And that's
Mm-hmm.
something that I've always tried to live by is, and if the crisis du jour doesn't happen, you've got even more time to keep working down your task list. So,
Yes. Yes. And the other thing is when you're negotiating with your client originally and you have an estimate as to how long you think it's going to take you to do the work, increase it by 30%.
mhm.
And so at least that's a starting point. Now, again, everything is dependent on what happens in real life. Of course, we're talking about optimal scenarios here. But if your client has a date that they want something simply because they want it, by you adding 30% and they're not aware of it, you're giving yourself a little bit of cushion. Now, if they have a hard deadline because they have a hard deadline for some other reason that they have to deliver something down the road to somebody else they owe, you may not have that luxury. So everything we're saying here depends on the circumstances. We're just kind of giving you guidelines as to how to try and operate when you can, to make it as fruitful for you as possible.
Good advice. Well, we're coming up on 1 o'clock. We don't have any questions in the Q&A box, but Joanne was kind enough to say that this was a great class and she wanted to thank us for the series. Joanne, you're very welcome. I'm glad you're enjoying it, and hope to see you on Monday. But Kathleen, I think we can probably wrap it up there.
All right, we're going to stop the recording and thank you all for coming.